The mail arrives on our street at approximately 1:45 in the afternoon. I know this with the specificity of someone who works from home and has absorbed, over 3 years of living in the same house, the small rhythmic certainties of the neighborhood. The garbage collection on Tuesdays, the school bus at 3:10, the particular sound of the mail slot when something thicker than a letter is being forced through it. On the afternoon in question, a Wednesday in early November, the thicker-than-usual sound brought me out of my home office and down the hallway to find a manila envelope on the mat. No return address printed, just our address, and in the upper left corner, written by hand in the neat, deliberate handwriting I had learned to recognize over 5 years. C. Mercer. Constance Mercer. My mother-in-law. I stood in the hallway for a moment with the envelope in my hand. My husband, Elliot, would not be home until 6. I had 4 hours and 11 minutes by the kitchen clock before he walked through that door. I took the envelope to the kitchen table, sat down, put on my reading glasses, and opened it. Inside was a complete set of divorce papers, already filled out, already organized, with tabbed dividers marking the sections that required my signature. The kind of paperwork that takes an attorney several hours to prepare and requires a detailed knowledge of a couple's assets, accounts, and property arrangements, a knowledge that Constance had apparently assembled with some care. Attached to the front page with a small binder clip was a handwritten note on her personal stationery. Her good stationery, the cream-colored kind with her initials embossed at the top. It said, "Sign now and leave cleanly. The house is not yours, the account is not yours. Be smart about this." I read the note twice. Then I read the papers. All of them. Every page, every clause, every carefully worded paragraph. I do this with important documents. I read them entirely, because I have learned that the things that matter most are usually in the sections that people assume can be skimmed. It took 40 minutes. Constance had been thorough. The property arrangement assigned our house entirely to Elliot. The financial arrangement returned all joint accounts to Elliot alone. There was even a clause about the dog, our 3-year-old rescue, a ridiculously affectionate animal named Birch who slept at my feet every night, assigned to Elliot's care. She had thought of everything. She had stripped me of everything. And she had done it in 11 pages of legal language mailed to our home on a Wednesday afternoon while my husband was at his desk 35 minutes away, entirely unaware. My name is Nadia. I am 32 years old. I have been married to Elliot Mercer for 5 years, and on the Wednesday that envelope arrived, I had been carrying a piece of information in my bag for 3 days that was going to make Constance's 11 pages of careful legal work the most consequential mistake she had ever made. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I put the papers back in the envelope, and I went to the kitchen and I started making dinner. Elliot's favorite. The recipe his grandmother had given me in the first year of our marriage, the one he had described as the meal that meant home to him, the one I had learned to make well enough that he sometimes said I made it better than his grandmother had, which was the kind of thing you only say to someone you trust with the full weight of your nostalgia. I made that dinner, and I waited. I want to ask you something before I go any further. When someone hands you something designed to end your life as you know it, not through cruelty they have invented, but through a calculated decision they have made about your worth, your future, your right to the things you have built, what do you do in the hours before you have to respond? Do you call someone? Do you react immediately? Do you let the fear and the hurt run through you unmanaged until you are empty enough to think clearly? Or do you do what I did, which was pick up a wooden spoon and make dinner? Because the only way I know how to hold something impossible is to keep my hands occupied with something real. I want you to hold that question while I take you back to the beginning. Elliot and I met when we were both 26, at a conference we had each attended for entirely different professional reasons, and neither of us had particularly wanted to go to. We were seated at the same table for a dinner that ran long, and by the time the dessert arrived, we had covered enough conversational ground that both of us had stopped paying attention to anyone else at the table. He is the kind of person who listens with his whole face, not performatively attentive, but genuinely, unhurriedly present, and I had not met many people like that before, and recognized it immediately as something worth paying attention to. We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony that neither of us wanted to make into a production. Elliot's mother, Constance, is a woman of considerable intelligence and fierce, consuming love for her only son. These two qualities are not in conflict in her. They operate together, each amplifying the other into something that has the shape of devotion and the function, sometimes, of control. She had been a single mother since Elliot was 9, his father having died of a cardiac event that arrived without warning at 53, and left a 38-year-old woman to raise a child alone with the kind of practical determination that Constance has always brought to things she decides to do. I respect that history.
I have always respected it. It does not explain everything about how she behaved, but it explains some of it. And I find that keeping the explanation in mind helps me hold my own responses more carefully. She had never fully welcomed me. Not coldly, she was never cold exactly, which would have been easier to navigate. She was warm in the specific way of a woman who has decided to tolerate someone and is making the tolerance look like warmth as a matter of social performance. She offered opinions about our home furnishings with the bright enthusiasm of someone sharing ideas rather than criticisms. She commented on our financial decisions in the language of concern rather than judgment. She expressed her preferences about how Elliot spent his time in terms of what she thought would make him happy, which always seemed to mean more time with her and less time with us. I managed all of this with the patience of someone who had decided that the marriage was worth the management, and who was genuinely fond of Elliot in a way that made Constance's difficulty with me a problem to be navigated, rather than a war to be fought. For 4 years, this equilibrium held. It held imperfectly, with strain visible at the seams in certain seasons, the holidays, the family decisions, the times when Constance's opinion arrived uninvited into a space where only Elliot and I had authority. But it held. And I believed, foolishly in retrospect, that holding was the same as working. 6 months before the envelope arrived, I received a medical diagnosis. An autoimmune condition, not life-threatening in the immediate sense, but serious, requiring treatment over time, requiring adjustments to the way I lived and worked and managed my energy. I had not yet told Elliot the full picture. I know this sounds strange, and I want to explain it without making it sound like I was hiding something from my husband, because I was not. I was preparing. I am a person who does not speak about difficult things until I have enough information to speak about them honestly, until I can answer the questions that will follow, until I have the shape of the thing clearly enough in my own mind to give it to someone else without losing control of the telling. I had told Elliot I was dealing with something medical, that I was gathering information, that I would tell him everything when I had everything to tell. He had accepted this. Elliot trusts my process even when it is slower than he would prefer, which is one of the reasons I married him. What I did not know was that Constance had found out. Her daughter-in-law, her daughter from a first marriage I had nothing to do with, had overheard a phone call of mine to a specialist and had told Constance what she heard. Constance had known for approximately 3 months before the envelope arrived, and in those 3 months, she had made a decision. Nadia was going to become a burden. The marriage was going to become difficult in ways that her son should not have to manage. The correct and loving thing to do, the protective maternal thing, was to extract Elliot from the situation before the difficulty became unavoidable. She had made this decision without consulting Elliot, without speaking to me, without asking a single question of either of us. She had simply acted, in the way she acted on everything she decided was for Elliot's benefit, unilaterally, confidently, and without doubt. I want to ask you something about the specific cruelty of that particular calculation. Not the cruelty of disliking a daughter-in-law. That is ordinary and manageable and does not require this level of response. But the cruelty of deciding, based on medical information obtained without permission, that someone is now a burden worth discarding. Have you ever had someone look at a difficulty in your life and use it as a reason to subtract you rather than to stand beside you? Have you ever been told, in action if not in words, that your value is conditional on your capacity to be easy? I have. And I want you to understand the specific shape of that before I tell you what was in the lab report I had been carrying in my bag for 3 days. 4 hours and 11 minutes is enough time to do a number of things. It is enough time to read 11 pages of legal documents carefully. It is enough time to make a pot of the most comforting meal you know how to make. It is enough time to sit in a kitchen that smells of garlic and slow-cooked sauce, and let your mind do the quiet, methodical work of understanding the full shape of what has just arrived in your life. I did all 3 of those things, in that order, in the 4 hours and 11 minutes between the envelope and the sound of Elliot's key in the lock. Reading the papers had clarified something for me. Not about the divorce. I had no intention of signing those papers, and the clarity was not about that. The clarity was about Constance, about the degree to which she had been willing to go, about the completeness of her willingness to act without Elliot's knowledge on the most intimate decision of his adult life. She had hired an attorney. She had gathered financial information, from where exactly I did not yet know, though I could infer that certain documents in our filing cabinet had been accessed during a visit when I had not been home. She had prepared a complete legal package. She had addressed it and mailed it. She had, apparently, assumed that I would sign it and leave quietly, because the note said to be smart, and she believed that smart, in my situation, meant compliant. She had fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. While the sauce was reducing, I took the lab report out of my bag. It was a standard-looking document, the kind of thing that arrives in an ordinary white envelope and gets set on the kitchen counter along with everything else that comes through the mail that is not immediately urgent. Elliot had put it there himself, 2 days earlier, with the vague and untroubled manner of someone who expects routine results. His GP had run blood work. Blood work was routine. He had left it for me to file, as he left all administrative documents, because I was the one who maintained our household records, and he trusted this division of our domestic life without thinking about it. I had opened it, as I opened everything, and I had read it, and I had spent 48 hours understanding it. I will tell you what it said in the next section, because it deserves its own telling, and I am not going to rush it. What I want to tell you about now is the 4 hours, specifically the quality of the waiting, which is something I have thought about a great deal since that afternoon. I was not afraid. I want to be accurate about this because I think people assume fear is the default response to receiving divorce papers from your mother-in-law on a Wednesday afternoon, and I understand why they assume that. But I was not afraid. I was something more specific than afraid. I was the person who had read the lab report and had spent 48 hours understanding it, and I knew something about that evening that Constance, wherever she was that afternoon feeling very certain of herself, did not know. I set the table with 2 places, as I always do. I put the manila envelope on my side of the table, beside my glass. I put the lab report face down beside it. I served dinner onto 2 plates, and I sat down, and I waited for the sound of the key in the lock.
Birch came and sat beside my chair in the specific way he does when he can tell something is happening that he does not understand. Not anxious, just attentive, nose pointed toward the door, waiting alongside me. I have a very clear memory of those last few minutes of waiting. The kitchen was warm from the cooking. The light was the particular low amber of a November evening at 6 o'clock. The food smelled the way that food smells when you have made it from memory, with the specific attentiveness that comes from wanting it to be right. And I sat in that amber light with an envelope that was meant to end my marriage, and a lab report that was going to rewrite the evening entirely. And I was calm. Not the performed calm of someone suppressing something larger. Genuine calm. The specific calm of someone who has read every document carefully, who knows what they are holding and what it means, and who is simply waiting for the right moment to put it in the right hands. And here's what I want to ask you about those 4 hours. Have you ever been in a position where you held something, a piece of information, a truth, a document, that you knew was going to change everything once it was in the open? And have you ever made the choice to wait? Not out of cowardice or hesitation, but because you understood that the timing of a truth matters as much as the truth itself. Because that is what those 4 hours were. They were not hesitation. They were deliberate. I chose to make dinner first, to let him sit down, to let the evening be ordinary for as long as it could be, because the next version of the evening was going to be something else entirely. I wanted to give him those last few ordinary minutes. That is the kind of love I was working with. And I want you to understand that before I tell you what the lab report said. 3 weeks before the envelope arrived, Elliot had come home on a Friday evening and said, casually, in the way he mentioned most things that were not yet fully formed as concerns, "I have been tired in a strange way. Not regular tired. Something specific." He said it without alarm, the way healthy 34-year-old men mention things they have not yet decided are worth worrying about. He had attributed it to a demanding period at work. I had listened and said something supportive, and had also, separately and silently, noted the specific quality of what he described. I had been doing a great deal of medical reading in the preceding 6 months, for reasons of my own. And in doing that reading, going through the literature on my own condition, understanding the mechanisms, learning to recognize patterns in physiological language that I had not previously had reason to learn, I had become, incidentally, considerably more medically literate than I had been before. The specific kind of tiredness Elliot described on that Friday evening triggered something I had read in a different context entirely. I filed it. I kept watching. The following week, I asked him if he would get some blood work done. I did not explain why. I said, "I know it is probably nothing, but I would feel better." He said sure, in the easy way he said sure to most things I asked him, made a GP appointment, went in 2 days later, and came home having forgotten about it within the hour. The results came 10 days after that, in the ordinary white envelope that he left on the kitchen counter for me to file. He had not opened it. There was no reason for him to rush. He had no reason to expect anything other than normal. I opened it that same afternoon. I read the first page. I read the second page. I went back to the first page. I sat down. The report showed a pattern of biomarkers that I recognized from my reading, a cluster of results that, taken individually, meant little, but read together by someone with the specific context I had recently acquired, pointed towards something I needed to verify before I was certain. I spent that afternoon going back through the medical literature I had been reading over 6 months. I cross-referenced. I read 3 different specialist summaries. And by the evening of the day the report arrived, I was not certain. Certainty was not mine to have. I am not a physician. But I was certain enough that it needed to be in a specialist's hands immediately. What the markers indicated was consistent with the early presentation of a hereditary cardiac condition. The specific condition that Elliot's father had died from, at 53, without warning, on an ordinary morning when Elliot was 9 years old. A condition that, caught at this stage, early, before symptoms had fully declared themselves, before the cascade of effects that made it dangerous had gathered momentum, had treatment pathways with significantly positive outcomes. A condition that, missed at this stage, would become progressively harder to manage and that, unaddressed entirely, would most likely follow the same trajectory it had followed in his father. Elliot did not know his father had this condition. Constance had never told him the specific medical detail of how his father had died. She had said cardiac event, which was true, and had not gone further. I knew this because I had heard her say it to someone at a family gathering 3 years earlier, and had noted briefly that she had not given Elliot the full picture, and had then filed it away as a grief she had managed by not managing it. Elliot had grown up believing his father had simply had a heart attack. He did not know there was a heritable component. He did not know that a genetic thread ran between his father's death at 53 and what was currently presenting in his own blood work at 34. I had spent 48 hours with this information before the envelope arrived. I had spent those 48 hours researching, preparing, and, this is the part that I think about most, deciding how to tell him. Not whether, how. Because there was no version of this where I kept it from him. There was only the question of the right moment, the right conditions, the right way to give him something this significant without the giving itself creating a panic that would prevent him from hearing the information clearly. I had been building toward a Thursday evening conversation, a quiet one, after work, with time and space around it. I had already called the specialist. I had already confirmed that the earliest available appointment was that Thursday. Everything was arranged. I had simply been waiting for the right moment, the way I wait for all things that need to be given carefully. And then the envelope arrived, and I sat in the kitchen with 2 pieces of paper, 11 pages of divorce documents on one side of me, and 1 lab report on the other. And I understood something with a clarity that felt almost physical. Constance had sent me papers designed to remove me from my husband's life. She had done this because she had learned about my diagnosis and had decided I was going to become a burden. She had not asked. She had not waited. She had acted on a conclusion she had reached about my value, without knowing that the woman she was trying to remove was the woman who had just found the thing that might keep her son alive. You are right at the edge of the moment this whole story has been building toward. Before I take you to that dinner table, if this story is sitting with you, if you have ever been told in any form that you were a burden someone needed to remove, please subscribe to this channel. There is a new story like this one every single week, and it is completely free. 1 second to subscribe. Now let me tell you what happened at that table. But first, I want to ask you this one question. What is the value of someone who stays when it is difficult? I am not asking rhetorically. I am asking because Constance's entire calculation was built on the idea that difficulty is a reason to leave, that when a marriage becomes complex, the loving thing is to exit before the complexity becomes unavoidable. She never asked herself what it means to have a partner who reads your lab results because they are paying attention, who spends 48 hours preparing to give you the most important piece of information of your adult life in exactly the right way, who makes your favorite dinner and waits for you to come home, not out of performance but out of the specific care of someone who has decided that hard things are exactly the things you do not face alone. That is what she was trying to remove from her son's life. That is what she called a burden. Elliot came home at 6:12. I know the time because I was watching the clock in the way you watch a clock when you know that what comes next is large, and you are measuring the ordinary minutes before it. He came through the door with his jacket already half off, and his tie loosened in the specific way that meant the day had been long. He smelled the food immediately. I watched his face do the thing it does when he recognizes a smell that means something to him. A small softening around the eyes that he is not always aware of doing. He said, "Is that Grandma's recipe?"
And I said yes. And he kissed me and sat down and said it smelled incredible and started telling me about his day. I want to tell you about those 20 minutes before I picked up the lab report, because I find them important, and I am not sure they would be obvious from the outside. I sat across from my husband, and I listened to him describe a meeting that had gone sideways, and a colleague who had handled a difficult client with unexpected skill, and a parking situation that had made him 7 minutes late getting back to his desk. Ordinary things, the ordinary texture of an ordinary person's ordinary Wednesday. I listen to all of it with the full attention I give him when he talks, because that is how I always listen to him, and because on this particular Wednesday, the attention cost me something to sustain. I was holding two very large things and making sure they did not show on my face, and the effort of that is not nothing. But he was not ready for what was coming. I needed him to eat something first. I needed him to be settled before the evening shifted. Halfway through dinner, I reached beside my plate. I placed the lab report on the table between us, face down. I said, "I opened your results when they arrived. I need you to read this, and then I need us to talk about it." I said it in the voice I use when I need him to hear me precisely, not alarmed, not urgent in a way that would prevent him from reading clearly, but serious enough that he set his fork down before he reached for the paper. He turned it over. He read it. The reading took longer than it should have. He read it once through and then went back to the top and read it again, which is what people do when they have read something that they need to be certain they have read correctly. When he set it down, his face had changed in the way that faces change when a piece of information has rearranged something in the reader's understanding of their own situation. Not panic, not yet, and that steadiness was partly because of how I had put the document in front of him, calmly and with preparation visible in the preparation. But something had shifted. He said, "What does this mean?" I told him. I had practiced this, not rehearsed in a way that stripped it of humanity, but prepared in the way that a person prepares when they need to deliver something important and do not want the emotion of the delivery to obscure the content. I told him what the markers indicated. I told him about the hereditary cardiac condition. I told him about his father, about what cardiac event actually meant, and why Constance had never given him the full clinical picture, and why that mattered now. I watched him absorb this, the knowledge about his father's death and the knowledge about his own results arriving simultaneously. Two things that had been in separate rooms his whole life, suddenly in the same room together. I watched him sit with all of it. And then he said, "How long have you had this?" I said, 2 days. He looked at the table. He looked at the food. He looked at me. And then his eyes moved to the manila envelope beside my plate, the one I had not drawn attention to, but that had been there throughout dinner, beside my glass, its existence a presence in the room that he had registered and set aside in the way that you set aside things that are not yet the main event. He said, "What is that?" I said, "Your mother mailed it to our house this afternoon, while you were at work." I said it without editorializing, without the particular weight in my voice that would have told him what to feel before he had a chance to feel it himself. I handed it to him. He opened it. He read the note first. I watched his face read Constance's handwriting and the 3 sentences she had written on her good cream stationery with her initials at the top. "Sign now and leave cleanly. The house is not yours. The account is not yours. Be smart about this." He read the note, and then he read the first page of the papers, and then he closed the envelope. He placed it on the table beside his plate. He was very still. I said nothing. Some moments require the person in them to have the space to arrive at their own understanding without being guided toward a particular response. I knew what he was thinking because I know him. He was thinking about the lab report and the envelope and the 2 days and the dinner. He was putting it together. And when he looked up at me, What was in his face was not the thing I had been afraid might be there. It was not doubt or confusion or a question about which piece of information to process first. What was in his face was something I did not expect and that I will carry for the rest of my life. It was a specific, complete recognition. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you have just understood something about them that you were not fully aware of before. His hands were shaking, not from fear, or not only from fear, from the weight of it, from the specific, simultaneous arrival of what he might have lost and what he actually had. He said, "You found this in my results, and you made me dinner." And then, because he is the person he is, he said one more thing. "You already called the specialist, didn't you?" He said it not as a question, but as the recognition of someone who knew the person across the table from him. I said, "You have an appointment Thursday." I want to ask you something about that moment, about what it means to be truly known by someone, to have the specific shape of how you operate recognized and named accurately by the person you love. Elliot knew I had called the specialist before he asked. He knew because 5 years of knowing me had given him that knowledge. And I want to ask you, when is the last time someone knew what you had done before you told them, because they were paying enough attention to know how you work? And when is the last time you offered that kind of attention to someone else? Elliot called his mother at 7:40 that evening. He made the call from the kitchen table, which meant I did not leave the room. He did not ask me to. And I had made a decision that I would not absent myself from this conversation as though it were private family business that did not involve me. It absolutely involved me. The envelope had been addressed to me. The note had been written for me. I sat across from him while he dialed, and I looked out the kitchen window at the November dark, and I listened. I heard one side of an 11-minute conversation. I heard Elliot ask his mother, very quietly, whether she had sent something to our house today. I heard his silence while she answered. I heard him say, "You hired an attorney?" I heard his silence again. I heard him say, "When did you know about her diagnosis?" Another silence, longer. I heard him say, "You did not ask me." I heard it said once, and then, 3 sentences later, said again, in a different register, "You did not ask me once." I heard Constance's defense assembled through Elliot's responses to it. "I was protecting you. I was trying to act before things became impossible. Someone had to do something, and you never would have done it yourself." I heard Elliot's voice move through several registers I had never heard stacked so closely together in 11 minutes. The disbelief first, then something colder, then the specific grief of someone who has just understood that a person they trusted completely had been operating without their knowledge on the most intimate decision of their life. Near the end of the call, I heard him say, "Nadia had my lab results for 2 days. She called a specialist before she told me what was in them. She made dinner. She waited for me to come home. And when I sat down, she gave me the results first. Before anything else, she gave me the results first." I heard him stop speaking for a moment, and then he said, "That is who you sent papers to this afternoon. That is who you told to leave cleanly." The call ended. He set the phone on the table and sat with it in front of him for a moment. Then he looked at me and he said, "She did not know." I said, "I know she did not know." He said, "That does not make it." And I said, "I know. I know what it does and does not make it." He nodded. We sat together in the kitchen where the food had gone cold on the plates, and Birch had come to sit between our chairs with his nose on my knee, and neither of us said anything for a while. There are conversations that need silence in the middle of them to be finished properly. This was one of those. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters and I do not want to be dishonest about it. I was angry. I had been angry since 2 in the afternoon, and had managed the anger through cooking and waiting and the deliberate composure of the dinner table. And now, with the call done and the papers on the table, and Elliot sitting across from me with the weight of all of it visible in his face, The anger was still there. Not performed anger, real anger, with a real basis. Constance had gathered information about my medical situation without my consent, had made a decision about my worth as a partner based on that information, and had taken legal action against my marriage without my husband's knowledge. That is not a thing I was required to be calm about. The calm I had maintained all afternoon was not the absence of anger. It was the management of it, directed toward a purpose that mattered more than its expression. The appointment on Thursday confirmed what the blood work had indicated. The specialist, a calm, direct cardiologist who clearly appreciated that she was dealing with two people who had done significant reading and wanted information rather than reassurance, used the words I had hoped to hear. Caught early, clear treatment pathway, very positive outcomes at this stage. She also said, looking at the results and then looking at Elliot with the directness of someone delivering an important truth. If this had gone undetected for another 5 to 8 years, the picture would have been considerably less straightforward. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. Elliot understood the arithmetic. I did too. Elliot began treatment the following month. It was not easy, and I will not make it sound easy. There were adjustments, some of them significant, some of them to his daily routine, and some of them to how he thought about his own body and its history. There were difficult weeks. There were appointments where the news was more complicated than we had hoped, and appointments where it was better. But the prognosis held. The treatment was working. And the man who had been told by his blood work that something needed attention was getting that attention at 34 rather than at 53. Because someone had been paying attention and had asked him to get blood work done. My own diagnosis, my autoimmune condition, the thing that had set all of this in motion, the thing Constance had decided made me a burden worth removing. I told Elliot the full picture in the days after the Thursday appointment. I had said I would tell him when I had everything to tell, and now I had everything. I sat with him on a Sunday afternoon, with tea and the dog, and the specific quiet of a house that has recently been through something large and is resting. And I told him all of it. The diagnosis, the timeline of my own processing of it, the treatments I was managing, the adjustments I had already begun to make, and the things I still did not know, and was still working toward understanding. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is how he listens to everything I consider important. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I want to tell you, because I think it is the most important thing said in this entire story. He said, "You don't have to have all the answers before you bring me in. I'm here for the ones without answers, too." I said I knew that. He said, "I know you know it. I'm just saying it anyway." I nodded. The tea had gone slightly cold. Birch was asleep on my feet. Outside the kitchen window, the November light was doing that particular late afternoon thing where it turns the most ordinary surface gold. It was, in its entirely unspectacular way, a very good moment. Constance. I want to tell you about Constance because I do not want to leave her as a villain at the end of this story, even though she did a villainous thing. She is a woman who has spent 25 years protecting her son with the only tool she fully trusted, which was her own judgment, and who had, on a Wednesday in November, allowed that tool to be deployed in a way that was wrong on every level, and that she had not paused long enough to question. She had not paused because she had already decided, and she had already decided because she was afraid of watching Elliot go through difficulty, afraid of the marriage becoming something hard, afraid in the specific way of a person who has already watched the man she loves most walk out the door in a coffin, and who has never entirely stopped being afraid of that happening again. I understood this in the weeks after. Not immediately. There was a period of considerable distance between Constance and us. Distance that Elliot established and that I did not ask him to close on any particular timeline. He needed to work through what she had done, which was different from forgiving it, and I gave him the space to work through it in his own way. She came to our door alone on a Saturday morning, about 4 months after the envelope. I answered. She was standing on our front step with no particular expression, not rehearsed contrition, not the performed softness of someone who has prepared a speech. Just Constance, in her good coat, looking at me the way I had not seen her look at me before. She held out a card. She said, "I was wrong about you." And then she turned and walked back to her car. I stood in the doorway for a long time after her car had gone. The card was a plain white envelope. Inside was a card, not bought, but a folded piece of her cream stationery, the same stationery she had used for the note. Her handwriting again, but different now. Smaller, less certain. The handwriting of someone who has spent 4 months revising something. It said, "I have not understood what you are. I think I am beginning to. I hope you will give me the time to learn it." I showed it to Elliot that evening. He read it twice, the way he reads things that matter. Then he set it down. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to give her the time." And he said, "Then we will." And we have. It is not simple, and it is not finished, and I am not going to pretend it is either of those things. But it is in motion, and motion, in my experience, is enough. And here is the last thing I want to leave with you.
Not about mother-in-laws, not about medical diagnoses, not even about the specific satisfaction of having the right piece of paper at the right moment. The thing I want to leave with you is simpler than any of that. It is this. The most significant act of love in this story was not the lab report. It was not the specialist appointment. It was not even the dinner. The most significant act of love in this story was the 48 hours before the dinner. The time I spent with a piece of information that concerned the person I love, making sure I understood it fully before I gave it to him. That is what paying attention looks like when it is working. That is what staying looks like. Not the dramatic gesture, not the grand declaration. The quiet, specific, costly work of being present enough to notice and loving enough to prepare. Have you ever been loved that way? Have you ever loved someone that way? Because I want you to know that it is available. It is the kind of love that is available to anyone willing to pay the attention it costs. My name is Nadia. My mother-in-law mailed me divorce papers at 2 p.m. and told me to leave cleanly. I made dinner instead. I put a lab report on the table. And the man who read it understood, in the reading, exactly what he had and what it was worth. We are still here. We are still at that table. The food is good, and the light is amber, and Birch is asleep on my feet, and neither of us has forgotten, not for a single day, how close the envelope came to making all of it disappear. If you have ever been told to leave cleanly, if someone has decided, without asking you, that you are a burden worth removing, that the difficulty of staying with you outweighs the value of what you bring, I want you to hear this. They did not do the reading. They did not sit with the information carefully and prepare to give it to the person who needed it most. They did not make the dinner. They made a calculation about your worth, and they got it wrong, because they were not paying the kind of attention that would have let them get it right. You are not the thing they calculated. You are the thing they missed.